In 1973, a weathered boot stuck out from beneath a hedge on a quiet Tennessee farm. Inside laid one of country music's most beloved comedians, still wearing his signature overalls. Nearby, his wife's body was discovered, face down in the grass. The killer's target, a fortune in cash rumored to be hidden within the walls of their modest home, money that would remain undiscovered for decades. David Stringbean Akeman trusted no bank, kept his savings sewn into his overalls, and brought joy to millions through his music and humor. But on one cold November night, this same distrust of banks would lead to a double murder that shook the country music world to its core. Deep in the hills of Kentucky, where poverty gripped every household during the Great Depression, a young David Akeman learned the value of a dollar and the power of laughter to ease life's burdens. Born on June 17, 1916, in Annville, Kentucky, David grew up in a world where music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. His father, James Akeman, couldn't afford to buy him a banjo, so young David crafted his first instrument from a shoebox and thread. This makeshift banjo became the foundation of a musical journey that would carry him from those humble Kentucky hills to the bright lights of Nashville. Standing at 6 feet 5 inches tall with a mere 130 pounds on his frame, David's nickname, Stringbean, came naturally. His impossibly long legs and arms made him a sight to behold, but it was his natural ability to make people laugh that truly set him apart. Those early years of poverty shaped not just his comedy, but his entire approach to life. By his teenage years, Stringbean had mastered the clawhammer style of banjo playing, a traditional technique that would become his trademark. He'd spend evenings entertaining neighbors after long days working in the fields, developing a unique blend of music and comedy that drew from the rich traditions of Appalachian culture and vaudeville performances he'd witnessed at local theaters. His comedy wasn't sophisticated, it didn't need to be. Stringbean understood that sometimes the simplest jokes hit hardest, especially when delivered by a man wearing pants hiked up to his chest, suspenders stretched to their limits, and a shirt that barely reached his waist. This wasn't just a costume. It was a reflection of the hand-me-down clothes of his youth, transformed into an iconic image that would make millions laugh. Those who knew him in these early days often spoke of his determination. Even as drought and economic hardship ravaged Kentucky, Stringbean kept playing, kept practicing, kept perfecting his craft. He'd walk miles to perform at local dances and gatherings, his banjo slung over his shoulder, earning barely enough to keep food on the table. And the 1930s brought more than just hardship to the Akeman family. Local radio stations began broadcasting live music shows, and young David would press his ear against any radio he could find, absorbing the styles of early country music pioneers. He started entering local competitions, often winning small cash prizes that helped support his family. His reputation grew throughout Kentucky, earning him spots on small radio programs where he honed his signature mix of music and comedy. During these formative years, Stringbean developed a philosophy that would guide him throughout his life. Entertainment should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. He remembered the joy that traveling musicians brought to his community during the darkest days of the Depression, and he committed himself to carrying on that tradition. By the late 1930s, Stringbean had developed a repertoire that included traditional mountain ballads, comedy songs, and his own compositions. He became known for his ability to take familiar tunes and add humorous twists to the lyrics, making even the most downhearted audience member crack a smile. His performances at county fairs and local theaters began drawing larger crowds, and word of the tall, skinny comedian with the lightning-fast banjo fingers spread throughout the region. What he didn't know then was that these struggles were forging something remarkable, a performer who could bridge the gap between the old world of traditional mountain music and the new era of entertainment that was dawning. In those Kentucky hills, a star was slowly taking shape, though fame was still years away. And while his rise to stardom would eventually come, those early lessons about the value of a dollar and the distrust of banks born in the Depression would never leave him. These same lessons, ironically, would play a crucial role in the tragic events that would unfold decades later on that fateful November night. As Stringbean's talent grew, so did his opportunities. But it was a chance meeting with the father of bluegrass himself that would finally open the doors to stardom and change the course of country music history forever. The corridors of Nashville's Grand Ole Opry buzzed with energy in the 1940s. The sound of Bill Monroe's revolutionary bluegrass style echoed through the halls, and Stringbean found himself at the right place at the right time. His first encounter with Monroe wasn't just a meeting, it was destiny. The father of bluegrass recognized something special in the lanky comedian's banjo playing and offered him a spot with the Bluegrass Boys. This partnership launched Stringbean into a new realm of stardom. His unique combination of masterful banjo playing and deadpan comedy made him stand out even among the legendary lineup of the Bluegrass Boys. While other performers chased the latest trends, Stringbean stayed true to his roots, wearing those signature overalls hiked up to his chest. Just as he had in Kentucky, the Grand Ole Opry audiences couldn't get enough of his act. Between songs, he'd tell tales of his fictional fair brother or share stories about his hunting dog Plum, who was so lazy he leaned against the wall to bark. His comedy routines became as anticipated as his music, with fans returning week after week to hear his latest jokes and see what outrageous outfit he'd wear next. Every Saturday night, Stringbean would take center stage at the Opry, his long legs creating an unforgettable silhouette against the backdrop. He developed a signature move, reaching down to his ankles to retrieve his banjo pick, making the audience roar with laughter as his already high pants seemed to stretch impossibly higher. This physical comedy, combined with his impeccable timing and authentic mountain humor, made him one of the most photographed performers at the Opry. His musical repertoire expanded during these years, incorporating everything from traditional mountain ballads to contemporary country hits, all delivered with his unique comedic twist. Songs like the Banana Boat Song and Pretty Little Widow became his trademarks, with audiences singing along to every word. His banjo style, deeply rooted in the claw hammer technique he'd learned in Kentucky, influenced a generation of players who followed. But even as his star rose, Stringbean remained grounded. While other performers bought flashy cars and expensive suits, he continued living modestly. He'd often say, "I got everything I need right here in these overalls." What many didn't realize was that this wasn't just a punchline, it was quite literal. The memory of those harsh Depression years kept him from trusting banks, leading him to carry large sums of cash sewn into his clothing. The 1960s brought television, and with it came Hee Haw. The show's producers recognized that Stringbean's old-fashioned comedy style would perfectly complement their vision of rural humor. His segments became highlights of the show, particularly the cornfield bits, where he'd emerge from the cornrows to deliver his signature one-liners. The show's massive success introduced him to an entirely new audience, making him a household name across America. On Hee Haw, Stringbean's comedy evolved into something more than just entertainment. It became a bridge between generations. Young viewers who'd never experienced the hardships of the Depression found themselves laughing alongside their parents at his traditional comedy routines. His character represented something timeless in American culture, a connection to simpler times that resonated across age groups. Behind the scenes, Stringbean's fellow performers often spoke of his generosity. He'd quietly help newcomers to the Opry, sharing both advice and, when needed, financial assistance. His wife Estelle became a beloved figure backstage, known for bringing homemade meals to share with the cast and crew. The couple's humble nature and genuine kindness made them favorites among the Nashville music community. Despite his television success, Stringbean never left the Opry. Saturday nights would find him on that famous stage, performing the same mix of music and comedy that had brought him there in the first place. He'd often say that the Opry was his real home, and he never wanted to be too far from it. By the early 1970s, Stringbean had achieved a level of fame that would have seemed impossible to that young boy making music with a shoebox banjo in Kentucky. His recordings sold well, his television appearances drew millions of viewers, and his Opry performances remained as popular as ever. Yet he continued to live in his modest farmhouse near Ridgetop, Tennessee, preferring the quiet country life to the glamour of Nashville. This simple lifestyle, combined with his habit of keeping cash close at hand, created an irresistible target for those who knew his ways. Rumors began to circulate about the fortune hidden away in his small farmhouse, whispers that would ultimately lead to unimaginable tragedy. While Stringbean's star continued to shine bright on stage, dark clouds were gathering over his peaceful country home. Two men had been watching, waiting, and planning, unaware that their actions would lead to one of country music's most horrific crimes. The winding roads of Ridgetop, Tennessee, led to a modest farmhouse where Stringbean and Estelle Akeman had built their quiet life away from the spotlight. Their home sat on a peaceful stretch of land, surrounded by dense woods and rolling hills. To passers-by, it looked like any other rural property. But rumors painted a different picture. Local whispers spoke of thousands of dollars hidden within those walls. Some claimed Stringbean kept money stuffed in mason jars buried in the yard. Others swore he had cash hidden in the chimney. These weren't just idle gossip. Stringbean's distrust of banks was well known throughout the community. He'd often pay for purchases with cash pulled from deep within his overalls, sometimes in denominations that raised eyebrows. The Akemans' daily routine was predictable. Every Saturday night, they'd drive to Nashville for the Grand Ole Opry, returning home in the late hours. Their schedule became common knowledge in the area, including to cousins John and Marvin Brown. The Browns were local troublemakers who'd heard every rumor about Stringbean's hidden fortune. John Brown, 23, had actually worked for Stringbean before, helping with odd jobs around the property. He'd seen firsthand how Stringbean handled money, watching the entertainer pull large bills from various pockets. Each glimpse of cash fed into his growing obsession with the legendary fortune. Marvin Brown, 21, shared his cousin's criminal inclinations, but had a more volatile personality. Together, they spent months planning, watching the Akemans' movements, and studying the layout of the property. They believed they had the perfect plan: break in while the couple was performing at the Opry, find the money, and disappear before anyone noticed. November 1973 brought early winter to Tennessee. The trees stood bare against gray skies, and frost covered the ground most mornings. The Browns chose Saturday, November 10th for their break-in. They knew the Akemans' routine by heart, or so they thought. What they didn't account for was Stringbean deciding to return home earlier than usual that night. The cousins arrived at the darkened farmhouse armed with guns, not just for the burglary, but ready for something worse if necessary. They broke in through a basement window and began their search for the rumored fortune. But their timing would prove fatally wrong. As they ransacked the house, the Browns discovered something that filled them with desperate rage. They couldn't find the money. Not in the walls, not in the chimney, not in any of the places rumor suggested. Their frustration grew with each passing minute, turning their planned burglary into something far more dangerous. The familiar sound of gravel crunching under tires sent panic through the cousins. Headlights swept across the property as Stringbean's car turned into the driveway. The Browns had a choice to make: flee empty-handed or confront the arriving couple. In that moment of decision, the night took its darkest turn. They chose to hide, guns ready, waiting in the shadows of the home where Stringbean and Estelle expected only peace and comfort after a long night of entertaining others. The couple had no idea that their sanctuary had been violated, that death itself waited behind their own front door. The porch light cast long shadows as Stringbean reached for his house key. In mere seconds, his lifetime of bringing joy to others would collide with the desperate greed of two men who believed they were owed a piece of his success. At 11:28 p.m., Stringbean's car rolled to a stop in front of his farmhouse. The night air was crisp, and a light wind rustled through the remaining autumn leaves. He and Estelle had just finished another successful show at the Grand Ole Opry, where he'd performed his signature songs and told his beloved comedy routines one final time. Stringbean approached his front door first, key in hand, while Estelle waited in the car to bring in some groceries they'd picked up on the way home. The porch boards creaked under his feet, a familiar sound he'd heard countless times before. But tonight, those boards also creaked under the weight of John Brown, who stood hidden in the darkness, shotgun raised. The moment Stringbean opened the door, John Brown confronted him, demanding the money. Stringbean, who had actually been carrying several $1,000s in his overalls that night, reached for his pocket, but Brown mistook this movement as an attempt to draw a weapon. The shotgun blast echoed through the quiet countryside. Estelle heard the shot and her husband's fall. Instead of fleeing, she ran toward the house, her instinct to help her partner of 36 years overriding all sense of self-preservation. She screamed Stringbean's name as she approached the porch. Marvin Brown, who had been searching inside, emerged and fired at her. Estelle turned and ran into the darkness, terror giving her speed despite her years. She made it nearly 50 yards across the yard, crying out for help in the night. But in the rural setting, with the nearest neighbor too far to hear, her cries went unanswered. Marvin Brown caught up with her near a hedgerow and fired again. Her last words were a plea for mercy. The Browns, now murderers instead of just burglars, returned to their frantic search of the house. They tore through walls, ripped up floorboards, and ransacked every room looking for the rumored fortune. The irony of their actions would not become clear until years later. They were searching in all the wrong places. Much of Stringbean's money was sewn into the bib of the overalls he wore, and more was hidden in a chimney they never checked. After 2 hours of destroying the house and finding little of value, the Browns fled into the night. They took only a chainsaw and some guns, a pitiful haul for a crime that cost 2 lives. Behind them, they left a scene of horror that wouldn't be discovered until the next morning. The following day, Grandpa Jones, Stringbean's closest friend and neighbor, came to check on the Akemans when they didn't answer their phone. As he approached the house, he saw Stringbean's body in the doorway, still wearing the overalls that had become his trademark. Following a trail of evidence, police soon found Estelle's body by the hedge, where she had fallen while trying to escape. The discovery sent shockwaves through the country music community. The Grand Ole Opry, which had echoed with laughter during Stringbean's performance just hours before, fell silent when the news arrived. Fellow performers struggled to comprehend how someone who had brought so much joy to others could meet such a violent end. The murder scene told a story of senseless violence. Stringbean had died instantly from the shotgun blast, never having a chance to explain that he would have given the money freely if asked. It was well known among friends that he often helped others in need. Estelle's death was marked by terror and desperation, her final moments spent running for her life through the darkness of their own property. The following days revealed more tragic details. The Browns had not only killed the Akemans, but had violated the sanctuary of their home. Furniture was overturned, walls were broken open, and family mementos were scattered carelessly across floors. The peaceful farmhouse that had been filled with music and laughter was transformed into a crime scene that haunted even veteran investigators. Perhaps the most heartbreaking detail emerged years later. In 1996, during renovations to the farmhouse, workers found nearly $20,000 in cash inside a brick chimney, money the Browns had failed to locate in their frenzied search. The discovery confirmed the rumors of hidden wealth that had led to the murders, but also highlighted the futility of the crime. The very money the killers sought had been within reach, yet they left empty-handed, having taken 2 lives for nothing. While Stringbean and Estelle's bodies were laid to rest in a quiet cemetery, the search for their killers intensified. But in a twist of fate, the Browns' own actions after the murders would lead investigators right to their door and reveal a connection to the Akemans that no one had suspected. The morning after the murders, while Nashville mourned, the Browns celebrated their successful burglary at a local bar. They bragged about their new chainsaw, Stringbean's chainsaw, drawing attention from people who would later connect their boast to the murders that were now making headlines across Tennessee. Local law enforcement, led by Detective Sherman Nickens, had little to work with initially, but the Browns' arrogance became their undoing. John Brown started spending money freely, raising eyebrows in a community where everyone knew his usual financial state. Marvin Brown couldn't keep quiet, hinting to friends about their involvement in something big. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered John Brown's previous connection to the Akemans. He had worked on their property. This link, combined with reports of the cousins' suspicious behavior and sudden spending, led police to their doorstep 3 days after the murders. Under questioning, the Browns' alliance crumbled. Each cousin tried to blame the other for the actual shootings. Marvin claimed John had pulled the trigger on Stringbean, while John insisted Marvin had chased down and killed Estelle. Their contradicting stories only strengthened the case against them both. The evidence was overwhelming. Police found items stolen from the Akeman home in both cousins' possession. Witnesses came forward with accounts of their incriminating conversations. The murder weapons were recovered, and ballistics matched them to the crimes. The trial began in April 1974, drawing massive attention from the media and country music community. The courtroom fell silent as prosecutors revealed the senseless nature of the murders, how the Browns had killed two beloved members of the Nashville community for virtually nothing. The jury took just 2 hours to reach their verdict, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Both John and Marvin Brown received double life sentences. The judge, reflecting the community's outrage, ordered the sentences to be served consecutively rather than concurrently, ensuring they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Marvin Brown died in prison in 2003, having served 30 years of his sentence. John Brown, however, continued to make headlines. In 2014, at age 64, he came up for parole. The country music community rallied together, with many prominent artists attending the hearing to oppose his release. Among them was Jan Howard, who told the parole board, "He deserves to stay in there until he draws his last breath." The parole board agreed. John Brown's request was denied, and he was told he couldn't apply again for another 6 years. The board's decision brought relief to many who remembered the gentle comedian and his wife, ensuring that at least one of their killers would face the full consequence of his actions. While justice was served in a courtroom, Stringbean's true legacy lived on, not in the tragic details of his death, but in the laughter and joy he brought to millions. His influence would reach far beyond his time, shaping country music and comedy in ways that would surprise even those who knew him best. Section 6, A Legacy of Laughter Lives On, 400 words. Today, when visitors enter the Country Music Hall of Fame, they can find Stringbean's cherished banjo displayed alongside those of other legends. But his true memorial exists in the countless recordings, television episodes, and memories that continue to make new generations laugh. The tragedy of Stringbean and Estelle's deaths led to immediate changes in the country music community. Stars who had previously maintained open-door policies at their rural homes installed security systems. The casual approach to fame that had defined country music's golden age gave way to a more cautious era. Many performers, including Dolly Parton and Porter Wagoner, began speaking openly about their own security measures. Yet Stringbean's influence on country music and comedy persisted far beyond these practical changes. His unique style of musical comedy paved the way for future entertainers like Junior Samples and Jerry Clower. The cornfield comedy segments he popularized on Hee Haw became a blueprint for mixing music and rural humor that influenced decades of entertainment. The Grand Ole Opry continues to honor his memory. Veterans of the show still tell stories about his performances, and clips of his appearances regularly draw millions of views online. His comedy routines, though rooted in a different era, continue to resonate because they tap into universal human experiences, the kind of genuine, heartfelt humor that knows no timestamp. The modest farmhouse where the Akemans lost their lives still stands, though its ownership has changed many times. Local residents say some visitors still stop by, leaving flowers or small tokens of remembrance. In Nashville's Woodlawn Memorial Park, fans occasionally leave picks and banjo strings at the Akemans' grave, a testament to their lasting impact on the music community. Perhaps Stringbean's greatest legacy is how he proved that success doesn't require compromising who you are. From those early days in Kentucky to his final performance at the Opry, he remained true to his roots, a simple man who found joy in making others laugh. The story of Stringbean Akeman reminds us that behind every stage name, every performance, and every laugh, there's a human being whose life touches countless others. While his death shocked the nation, his legacy of bringing joy to millions' lives on through the art form he helped create. But Stringbean wasn't the only country music star whose life was cut tragically short. In our next video, we'll explore another legend whose final performance came far too soon and the mysterious circumstances that still raise questions today.